I do need to acknowledge, I don't need to, I want to acknowledge that the Pemberton Library, and probably many of you, are situated on unceded territory of the Lil'wat Nation. It's more than just a disclaimer we say at the start of these things. It's something that that I think we all should, think about. And yeah, I'm sure many of us are. So anyways, welcome everybody. I'm going to throw it to Veronica now and enjoy. It's going to be great.
Thanks, Brennan. We've got a few people in the waiting room as well, just so I'm sure you'll see that. And yeah, if you're not from Lil'wat Nation traditional territory, you can always just plug in where you're tuning in from in the chat, because we'd love to hear from where you're from. And so, yes, we're going to talk about natural hazard risks tonight. And I recognize right off the bat, we're already in the middle of a pandemic. So the intention of this presentation is not to cause anxiety. It really is just to look at this incredible landscape that we live in and to get a better familiarity and understanding of some of the challenges and opportunities within this landscape. Oh, computer stalled. Okay, this is a map of the Lil'wat River watershed. And I'm coming, as Brendan mentioned, we're coming from the Lil'wat traditional territory, which encompasses most of this map, as well as Lower Statliam. And the colored portions are some of the major sub-watersheds of the Lil'wat River watershed. So we've got the upper Lil'wat in the light blue. If you were a crow and you could fly west or southwest, that would bring you pretty quickly to Toba Inlet, Princess Louisa, Jervis Inlet. So really, as a crow flies, we're quite close to the ocean at the headwaters of the Lil'wat River Valley. And then we've got the meager in green there. That's the right on the border of the upper Ilaho Valley into the Squamish River watershed. And then we've got the Whistler in the Whistler Green River watershed in orange. And so at Alta Lake in Whistler, everything from Alta Lake downwards flows into the Green River and then onto the Lil'wat River watershed. And then finally, the lower Lil'wat Lake. And of course, sorry, the purple is Birkenhead, really important salmon habitat throughout the watershed, but specifically through the Birkenhead as well. This is a sign that we did through Stewardship Pemberton.
Sorry to interrupt, but we don't see anything on the screen except you.
Oh.
Just so you don't go too far without showing your.
Well, the slides, you guys aren't here to see me.
You look lovely though.
I can see your slides, Veronica.
Okay.
I can see your slides too.
I can see.
My slide was up and then it disappeared and I have you now.
Oh.
Can someone help me?
I don't know, Ted. I think.
I see Gwen Lillams has the same thing and Nick Fisher too.
Okay. I wonder if I can stop sharing and then reshare.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, so it looks like.
It just came up.
So most people can see the slides. Does anyone have any IT? Oh, wait, can you see it now, Ted?
Yes, it just came up. Thank you very much.
Okay, so hopefully there's not a delay passing through, but going slide to slide, but hopefully we'll get it.
Sorry to interrupt.
No problem, Ted. Okay, I can jump back in here. So we, Lil'wat River watershed. And we are the smallest land base of the Fraser River watershed. This is the map of BC, and that is the Fraser River watershed in the green there. And we are a tiny dark green sliver at the bottom. This is significant because the Lil'wat Harrison contributes the second highest flow to the Fraser River because of our glacial snowmelt, and really important for salmon species and other species that depend on the Fraser being cool temperatures during the migration of salmon in late summer. So, sorry, stalling again. So I have alluded to a lot of different reports and articles that in this presentation, and one is through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, through the United Nations, and they've produced a variety of really interesting reports. And I like this quote because it really speaks to the impacts of climate change on land processes. So something a little bit different than what you'd expect to see on effects to, say, species or humans specifically. It really does have specific effects on the types of processes we're going to talk about tonight, like landslides and flooding. Sorry, my slides are slow to change. Okay, and another couple of reports I'm going to talk to you about quite a bit is the some of the provincial documents that have been put out. This is a BC Climate Change Indicators report from 2016, and as you can see that we are meant to see some indicators around temperature increase, increase of annual precipitation. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically regionally in a little while. Many of the glaciers in southern BC are likely to disappear, as well as rivers dry up, and then this will have implications for some of the species. Okay, come on, slides change. Okay, so I did want to do a little bit of an intro to who I am, because I wanted to really be clear that I am not a geologist or a volcanologist or even a biologist. I went to school for a fish wildlife tech and moved to Whistler in '96. And I was fortunate to get a job acting as a fish tech for the municipality that I did that for 10 years. And after that, I started working for a consulting company, and I had access to all sorts of experts in a whole range of species. So whether from tailed frogs or sharp-tailed snakes, of course, salmon, grizzly bears, wolverines, mountain goats. I really had the most fortunate opportunities to learn from some brilliant people in the field, and always took advantage of getting out there. So my 10 years with that consultancy brought me all around the province, but I spent a ton of time at the base of Mount Meagher. And in fact, throughout this whole watershed, looking at salmon and a whole range of species. So it was through that work professionally, but I also have started Stewardship Pemberton in 2006. And our mission is to connect community to nature. And so doing talks like this and doing community field trips like we've done out to Meagher, are some of the kinds of work that is really what I am the most passionate about. So I consider myself a Pacific Northwest enthusiologist. I am really enthusiastic about this landscape, and I feel like it's almost a transcendental value of nature. It's my version of faith that really drives my every action in daily life. So today we're going to talk about few things, and we're going to start with volcanoes. So Mount Meagher is part of this larger ring of fire in the Pacific, throughout the Pacific Ocean. More specifically, it's part of this Cascade volcanic arc, and part of this North Garibaldi volcanic belt. It's one of the northernmost volcanoes in that range. And the volcanic activity at Mount Meagher is really stemming from this subduction zone at the Juan de Fuca plate. So this is the plate tectonics that's really going to create havoc when we finally get that earthquake that they keep talking about is imminent. And this is that larger process that's really driving the volcanic, here we go, the volcanic action out at Meagher. So there's been a number of really cool studies that have come out of some brilliant people wandering around our watershed in the last few years. And I do love dramatic titles. And so I pulled this quote out, that Mount Meagher has a 2 million year history of intermittent explosive volcanism. And this is a map from a report that was done for assessing what the hazard is for an eruption at Mount Meagher. And Mount Meagher is this classic volcano, but it doesn't have that conical shape. It's really been affected by the way it was formed, and it's got high rates of erosion. It's got one person, Rick Guthrie, explained it really well to me, that Mount Meager is kind of like a mountain that's made of ball bearings. So what you get is this, instead of a single peak, like a traditional volcano, you have a series of peaks, kind of like a king's crown, where you've got Meager and Plinth, and you've got all these different peaks that make up the complex. And so the last time Mount Meager erupted was about 2,400 years ago. This is pretty much like yesterday in geological time. And this map here is another recent work that was done to assess really how far the impacts were for some of the largest volcanoes in the last Holocene era. So you can see here, this is Mount Meager and Mount St. Helens. And Mount Meager, it wasn't a little puff of smoke the last time it erupted. You can see that that ash actually deposited all through BC and into Alberta. So it actually had quite a few dramatic effects. And so what that study that was done, the risk assessment, was looked at the three major factors that come with a volcanic eruption. And the first is that ash flow, or that tephra. So the researchers, they looked at the climatic effects that were occurring at site over a period of a summer. And then they used modeling data. Do you guys mind muting? I have a couple of people, I can hear some background noise, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone. So they modeled, because we don't have a lot of data from a volcano that erupted 2,400 years ago, they used eruptions on other volcanoes with similar characteristics. And so in order to provide the data for their model. So this chart here is showing the dispersal of ash and the deposition that you might see for a mid-magnitude eruption, which was modeled based on Nevada del Rio in Colombia. And then the large scale eruption was modeled after Mount St. Helens eruption. And you can see the results of the study show that most of the time that ash deposition went towards William Lakes and through to Kamloops. And during the large eruption, it really does head off into Alberta. And the deposition there isn't very deep the further it goes, but it certainly has some significant effects, not only just for Pemberton, but more regionally. Come on, change. Okay, so here's a friend's yard. Thank you, Michelle, for sending me these photos. This is showing some of the deposition at Gun Lake. She was digging a septic, and lo and behold, here's this great photo of that demonstrates the deposition that came from that Bridge River plume from the last time Meager erupted. And also, this is the top of Mount Penrose. This isn't just in the valley bottoms, but this deposition is from the very mountain tops. And so the second risk factor that comes with volcanic activity is pyroclastic flow. So you can imagine there's all this energy built up. It's exploded the side of Plinth Peak. And then we've got this roiling mass of gas and rock and super melted glacier, and it's all roiled up together, and it's got somewhere to go. So that lighter stuff has gone off into the atmosphere and gotten deposited all over the province. And then we've got this more dense material. And this is the highest risk factor when it comes to volcanic activity. This is a picture looking at Plinth Peak, looking south, and where the location of the last volcanic eruption happened. So when it did, sorry, I think the stall comes for when I admit people. This is a very good Zoom learning lesson. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the last time that Meager erupted, it created this pyroclastic flow that blocked the Lillooet River. And this is looking at Keyhole Falls and the remnants of that, what blockage looked like. and it backed up the Lillooet River for a very, very long way. And it is this risk associated with a volcanic event that could be a really disruptive factor to our little town. So this is what has resulted from many, many years of the Lillooet River cutting down into that softer volcanic material. Keyhole Falls is one of the most splendid places on Earth. And here's a picture of the modeling data, again, from the small, medium, and large, based on those Mount St. Helens and Nevada Del Ruy. And you can see the large scale events modeled on Mount St. Helens data is that pyroclastic flow is expected to make it to Pemberton. There's evidence that the extent of the last eruption did make it just to town. So certainly a high risk event. And then the final risk with volcanoes is lava. The characteristics of Mount Meager: the lava isn't that really viscous lava that you might see in Hawaii, let's say. It doesn't apparently have the same kind of characteristics you would expect. And so the data based on for the extent of lava flow is really quite limited to, say, the power project and very close to the base of the mountain. And however, they did say that the model had a hard time compensating for the drop in landscape of Keyhole Falls, but still, based on the characteristics, not expected to make it to Pemberton. And so I thought I would just note this, wandering around looking for mountain goats. These are the kind of really cool things that you can see on Mount Meager, these gas vents. They're little just cracks in the earth that is blowing out warm gases all winter that creates these little potholes, and really fun to find. And so one of the things about, we're gonna scooch into landslides now, but I pulled out these two quotes because two reports highlighted that a volcanic eruption may be caused by a very large landslide based on that depressurization. So although Mount Meager is considered a dormant volcano, there are factors that may affect its eruption. Okay, moving into landslides. This is a before-after picture of Mount Meager landslide. And so there's been some recent work, again, as I mentioned, around Mount Meager. And in the past 8,000 years, there's been over 25 mass wasting events or giant landslides. As I said, Rick Guthrie explained it as a mountain made of ball bearings, and Glenn William-Jones was quoted in CBC saying, "This is a big, massive mountain that is rotten." So this is a map that shows glacial extents and recession, as well as the dotted lines. For the green outlines are go with this table. These are areas that have slid in the last few thousand years, but some quite recently, like 2010. And then the black dotted lines are areas of instabilities that haven't slid yet. And so you can see this is the before picture before the Mount Meager landslide in 2010. And you can see that there is a lot of evidence that this is not a stable watershed. There's still quite a bit of material moving through the river valley there. For the size of a river like Meager, you really wouldn't expect that you would have that much of a debris flow fan. And here's what it looks like after. So you can see the volume of debris that came down from the mountaintop into the valley bottom with over almost a 13-kilometer run out. So here's a before picture. These photos are in this article from 2010. Sorry, a 2010 description of what happened there. So there's the before picture. You can see that really convex roll. At the base of that roll, there is water flowing out from underneath the rocks. Okay, and here's an after picture. So you can see that that convex roll is gone, most of the peak is gone, and there it is again, that before picture, and here's that after picture. So you can see, and just a reminder for everyone to mute, there is a helicopter there for scale. So you can see the size and scale of this landslide initiation zone. This landslide had a seismic trace up to 2,800 kilometers away. And this is what happened, that debris came down, it blocked up the Meager River. This is looking downstream towards the slide where it met the Meager River and how Meager had backed up. And so there was a big concern that once that debris would let go, it would have some kind of catastrophic failure and end up with a big debris flow. This was last fall, driving through the new road that goes towards the hot springs. And you can see how the river's now cut down through all that debris. So again, this is a before and after picture, and there were campers if you can see in the bottom picture, that little bump out on the bottom along the Forest Service Road, they were camped there, and they had an exciting experience of hearing the two cracks and then this enormous freight train of a landslide, and they were lucky enough to get out with their lives. And the province really nailed where this campground went, because the landslide debris did go to both sides of it. So back to this map that we started with about these instabilities, and you can see where the letter A is, right almost in the center of your map, that there's a really large dotted line, black dotted line there. That is a really large instability that is currently moving about 3 centimeters a month. And it's about 10 times of the size of the Capricorn slide. And it is one of the higher risk instabilities on Mount Meager at the moment. And because of that, the local governments, Leewat Nation, SLRD, and Village of Pemberton have invested into monitoring that landslide in real time, working with academic partners through the Center for Natural Hazard Research, and interjects the power project right at the base of that instability. So that is being monitored as we speak. And Glenn, if I knew you were going to be here, I'd put you on the spot and get you to tell me all about what the data says now. But maybe we'll leave that for next year. And so I think one more thing about this also does talk a little bit about that deglaciation. So it really shows how the glaciers are moving away. That is uncovering these areas of instability. And this is something that we expect to see throughout British Columbia, this recession of our glaciers. These are numbers in terms of kilometers squared losses of glaciers that we have seen. This is a 2019 publication from the province, and this was a risk assessment based on climate change. And they assessed it for a number of different factors, including like how likely this was to occur, what the consequences were going to be in terms of all the things you could think of a consequence of a risk like this, economic damage, injury and death, but they also assessed mental health effects. And you can see here, glacier mass loss and extreme precipitation both contribute to risk of landslides, both Mount Meager and other locations like Mount Currie. And of course, we all saw the big slide on Joffrey recently. So this is another real risk with this changing climate, that as the permafrost begins to thaw and the glaciers recede, we're going to see those areas of instabilities it just become more volatile. And this is something that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has high confidence that this is going to become a real risk in mountainous areas. Okay, into floods. And again, I'm giving a whole lot of information. If you have questions, pop them in the chat and we'll circle back at the end. So here's a picture of, look at the Riverlands barn where the Ryan River is just about ready to meet the Lillooet River. And here's a view looking from Upper Lillooet down towards Mount Currie in the end there. And this is an oxbow lake. And so prior to having extensive diking and drainage, this is exactly what you would expect to see along the whole Lillooet River valleys. These isolated oxbow lakes along the side, and the river could move side to side. So we've been collecting data on the Lillooet River for quite some time. And in the 40s, there was a very large event. And up until that point, people were settling and trying to settle and being quite often wiped out by floods. And just after that flood in the 40s, the federal government did a massive investment into infrastructure to do some improvements in order to make land arable. And this wasn't just in Pemberton, but all through the province. And so they did a huge number of upgrades. So they cut off 14 kilometers of Lillooet River meanders, like the ones you see here, and built almost 40 kilometers of dikes. So the longest cut was the Mackenzie cut at 4.3 kilometers. And they would ensure that you can see there's a couple other cuts going from some of those meanders. And just in order to drain the land and allow to have more stable opportunities to farm. So here's a look at the Riverlands cut from the Diking District office. This is a picture from their office there on the left when the cut was just starting. And then that's a picture of Riverlands just before it was born, built, not born. And yeah, so quite a bit of change. Here's the aerial photo of town from 1947 overlaid with today's boundaries. So you can see that we had quite a bit of water right over the glen, right where the stoplight is. And I did live in the glen for quite some time, and you really would dig down into your yard. And my neighbor across the street, I had sand and she had cobble. And this is the reason, it's because we had a series of different channels going through that portion of town. And so we had a series of events. So we've got the dikes in place, we've changed the flow. At that time as well, they did blast Tenace Narrows and lowered the Lillooet Lake by by a huge amount. So that was also one of the strategies in order to create arable land. And there's a series of big floods starting in the 1984, 91 was a Labor Day flood. And then finally, our largest flood on record was in 2003. 2003, this is Rutherford Bridge washout. You can see when you drive to Worcester next time where that train track sits compared to the riverbed. And it's really astounding to think that the river had as much power to wipe out the train bridge. And I think many people here tonight have stood on the Nairn Falls platform, and this is what it looked like during the 2003 flood. So logs are being deposited up onto the platform. And when you stand down at the bottom and you look and it's just bedrock there, this is the reason, because it really pumps a lot of water through that narrow area. And so this is something, this atmospheric river, or these really high intensity, warm rainfall events that hit our coast in the fall, is something that causes our most of our flooding. There's been a couple of floods in the spring in our 100+ years of record, but most of them are rain on snow events in the fall. And we can expect these kinds of events to continue to increase. We had one there not too long ago. We've had two this year, none that compared with 2003. However, we're lucky because we had outdated floodplain mapping, and that floodplain mapping in Pemberton was updated in 2018, and the scope of work in order to inform this plan was really, really well done. And so our a gauge that is used in order to set regulations like your flood construction level, so how high you need to build your house in order to be safe from flooding, is usually based around the 200-year flood flow. And so when 2003 happened, according to the previous floodplain mapping that had been done, it was considered a 200-year flood flow. We did get to just under 1,400 cubic meters per second. You can see that here in the KWL flow column. And now the new estimate for a 200-year flow is closer to 2,000 cubic meters per second. So there's a lot of columns here. I want you to ignore most of them. Sorry, my program stalled as we admit somebody else. Okay, that's all I want you to look at, these two columns. So those are the return year. You can see that we've got a 200-year return there. That's up to 2000. The 2003 flood of record is now considered a 50-year flood. And I want to highlight this 5-year return at 849 cubic meters, because you can see in this data set that this 2016 flood shouldn't really have resulted in mass flooding. However, here's a picture from the report from 2016. This is at the Lillooet River Forestry Bridge, and you can see the water's well over the banks on both sides. And this is, I live just before the Lillooet River Bridge across from the Adventure Ranch on the river. And in the set of 4 houses, the river did almost got within less than a foot from over the topping the dike at our place. So you can see, even though the period of return was quite low compared to 2003, that things are starting to change within the watershed. That 2016 event also did cause quite a few debris flows. That's South Creek. So what happens when we live in a river valley? We have a river, we know it floods. So what we do is we build these dikes and we make sure that the water stays where it's supposed to go. So now we've got all this landslide material that came down in 2010 that's been slowly making its way down the river valley. And in 2018, that pulse of sediment reached the valley. So everything that Mount Meager put into that river during that landslide is now coming into town. And what's happening, it's depositing on the bottom of the river, and it's reducing the amount of area that our river has to stay when we get these higher flows. So in order to combat that, we need to either raise our dikes, which is very, very expensive and logistically challenging, or we need to dig out the gravel. And so the gravel removal has been the strategy that has been that your diking district dollars pay for. The previous estimates of deposition was 30 to 40,000 cubic meters were being deposited annually. That's based on those KWL numbers. The new updated floodplain mapping show that this is closer to 180,000 cubic meters every year. So in order to remove that much gravel to offset the amount that's depositing is incredibly expensive and challenging. So the diking district has been doing everything in its power to try and get ahead of it, but it's just the volume that's come down is really affecting the capacity of our rivers currently. So this is back to that risk assessment. And there are 2 here, moderate flooding, severe river flooding. And keep in mind, this is a provincial risk assessment and would be different for different watersheds. Because we have these effects of Mount Meager, severe riverine flooding is a real possibility for our region in Pemberton, specific to the Lillooet River Valley. And this is back to the indicators of climate change, the 2016 report. And you can see here, these, the map on the left is divided into the seasons. So we've got spring, summer, winter, fall. And down here at the bottom, you can see that our spring, summer, and fall precipitation events are going to start going up and are continually going up. And the average precip is also going up. So this is something that we need to begin to be prepared for. And so a really quick plug for you trail builders out there, because of these big atmospheric rivers that we're seeing, often in midwinter. Not a big issue for us when it's midwinter because the snowpack has a lot of absorption that it can take that river water, but closer to Pemberton, we start to channel that water, and it really is devastating to trails, but it's also really environmentally devastating. So I just wanted to put a plug out there to all you trail builders, really start looking at that mesohabitat in the areas that you're building trails, and make sure you're building your trails robust enough to combat these kinds of intense precip events that are going to be coming our way more often. Okay, finally, on to forest fire. We had forest fires this year, and this is a picture. I'm going to talk a little bit about the 2015 forest fires, because the largest forest fire in our region was the Boulder Creek fire, which occurred in 2015. And I will loop back to the fires that we saw this summer. This fire started in late June. It had been a very, very dry spring. We had really warm temperatures through late March, up to 30 degrees. So the spring really kicked off early, extremely early through to March. At that time, the Upper Lillooet Hydro Project was being constructed. This fire started with lightning, and it caused all sorts of problems, as you can imagine, when you're in the middle of building a massive hydropower project. And so many problems, in fact, that the power project ultimately published how challenging it is to write, because they were flooded, they had multiple debris flows, and then they were hit with this forest fire. So the Boulder Creek fire was, for me, it was really interesting because I knew the landscape so well, so much so that I knew where active bird nests were when the fire hit. So it was really interesting to see such a large scale landscape fire. It ultimately was about 7,000 hectares, and to see the effects of that. This is looking, you can see this is an avalanche chute. You see the water at the bottom, and it was these landscapes that really surprised me, that burnt with some intensity, where it was green alder growing, and cottonwoods that just, the fire was so intense, it burnt them up. This fire, when it lit, had the 30-30-30 rule going against it, where it was 30 degrees, there was 30K winds, and humidity was less than 30%. So really dry conditions, really windy, and really warm. When the fire lit, that first picture, it moved 15 kilometers the second night it was burning, from one end of the road 15 kilometers down the road. So I think about when that fire started up at Miller this summer, and having seen how this forest fire moved so quickly, I was keeping a close eye on what the wind and the weather were doing at that time. Again, this fire, I had been working up there so much, and this is looking at the really important mountain goat winter range from that. They have their winter range on Keyhole Falls on those very steep sides. And then they spent the summer up here at the top of the mountain. And this was really severely impacted by forest fire. And forest fires are, of course, very, very regenerating and part of a natural cycle. But what you'd normally expect to see in a forest fire is a mosaic pattern. So you can see on the bottom part of this map, that's along Meager Creek. And that's what you'd expect to see with a forest fire, like a real mosaic pattern where you've got some really high intensity burns, you've got some areas of low intensity, and it's all mixed up together. And this creates those conditions where you have natural regeneration and a healthy forest fire. You can see these really large areas of red that are showing high intensity burn, and not just high intensity, but a lot of these areas were extreme intensity where the topsoil burnt. And what happens when you just burn right down to mineral soil, that regeneration is really challenging. And this is based on a number of different factors, of course, the 30-30-30 rule, but also forest management. A lot of the areas where the fire spread really quickly were about 25-year-old replanted forests. So lots of opportunity for that forest to move from branch to branch. And yeah, so this forest fire was just around 7,000 hectares. And I want to talk about the fires that came here. This is a forest fire map, and Plinth is up on the left. On the bottom left is right next to the Mount Callahan, there is the Ilaho fire. The Ilaho fire is the largest forest fire that ever occurred in the Coast Mountains, and it was up to 20,000 hectares. And there was a time where these two fires were coming close to connecting, where it was looking like they were going to end up being a mega fire. So this is some cool mapping technology on the BC Wildfire site, where this is all the forest fires that have occurred pretty much for the last 100 years. And if you look up to the top right, if you see the word Seton, I don't have a cursor on this program. I think I'll have to call Zoom. But so the word Seton, there's a polygon around that. I want you to look at that polygon. That's a 1,300 hectare fire from 1958. And I'm going to show you in context. I'll give you a minute to get, so it's Seton Lake is, sorry, where that is on Anderson. Anderson Lake is the bottom of your screen there. And this is the Elephant Hill fire. So, okay, sorry, without a cursor, this is really tricky. Anyway, that 1,300 hectare fire is just above the number 10. And then you can see that Ashcroft Elephant Hill fire that ended up being 880,000 hectares in 2017 as part of one of the worst forest fire seasons in all of British Columbia history. Before 2017, the worst forest fire year was in 1958, where almost 880,000 hectares burnt in 1958. The Ashcroft fire was 192,000 hectares, which puts our 3 fires that we had this year. The largest fire was along Lillooet Lake that got to about 360 hectares, and the other Miller fire was about 40, and the one above Heather Jean was about 35 hectares. So really small fires in the grand scheme of forest fire impacts. And forest fires are really cool to walk around. There's always some interesting treasures to be found. Morel mushroom picking is one of my favorite things to do. And you find these landscapes. I did see some conspiracy theories once about how it was possibly some dew weaponry that was burning California homes. But really, this is, forest fire has such strange behavior where you'll have a tiny pocket of green trees in the middle of an extremely high intensity burn, like this tree that of course we kicked. And so when that forest fire happened, we had been working on the project for about 5 years, and we had all this data related to the project. And I thought, man, someone could use this data to assess this massive forest fire. And I contacted Lori Daniels out of UBC and said, hey, would you be interested? And they did ultimately do a study on the Boulder Creek fire, which is really interesting, and produced that wildfire severity map. And of course, after seeing the 2017 and the 2018 fire season, where over 1 million hectares are burnt in this province, this is a really high risk for our province, and something to think about, and certainly something to plan for within our region. There's a lot of agricultural land, and our town base aren't so much at risk, but there's areas like Reed Road and certainly all through the lower Lillooet Lake area. There's some real considerations for how we're planning for forest fire risk in the future. And so this is coming to the end of my talk here with all of this information very, very quickly. We are hosting in partnership with the Center for Natural Hazard Research at SFU. We have partnering academic institutions through with UBC, Royal Roads, Quest University, and Portland State University. And we're working collaboratively to understand cascading natural hazards in rural communities. And this is applicable to all of this entire Cascadia region, because most of the research has centered around urban centers. And for me, you know, there's all these people that are interested in doing research, and I feel like being able to connect them with communities that are interested in harnessing that brilliant power, it's just a win-win. So it's been really exciting to work on this project. So as part of that, we have a survey that Brennan's going to put the link in the chat. If you haven't already done it, I would hope you would consider taking it to help inform our project. And then we are hosting a couple workshops in early December. And so we've got Glenn Willing-Jones, who will be speaking, as well as Steve Kwan from Quest University. And we've got MP Pratik Reeler will be talking to us a little bit about federal programs quickly. And of course, our local emergency managers through the SLRD and other of our government partners that are participating. And finally, the second part of the workshop is really to hear from people so that we can help, because I feel like planning for natural hazard disasters is going to be really successful if we include the people that are going to be most affected. And so that is the intent of this workshop. So if you are in lockdown and looking for something to do, December 2nd, we're going to be discussing Pemberton and Leewat Nation and SLRD region on December 2nd. If you're in Squamish, we're doing that on December 3rd. And any questions? Thank you.
Veronica. Yeah, we do have a few that have popped up. Actually, I didn't want to interrupt you, but Glenn did mention earlier on he wouldn't mind giving a real brief update for you if that suits. If you still good for that, Glenn?
Absolutely.
All right.
Amazing.
Perfect.
In fact, I'm going to try and see if I can attach a little bit of a teaser for everyone. I'm going to attach a photo, if I can do this, that was collected from just looking over the glacier where the gas is coming out on Mount Meager, directly at the slope that we're most concerned about, this one that Veronica mentioned that is potentially 10 times the size of the 2010 landslide. So let me just see if I can bring this up. Find it. Where did I put it? Oh, geez. Okay, this is technology at my best.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on, too many screens. Where did I put it? Oh, there we are. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. Adding to chats is always interesting. So let's see if people can sit there. I've just posted a photo that people should be able to see in their in the chat box. So this was taken last Wednesday. We're getting now daily images and weather data from this site, looking over the fumaroles or the Mount Job Glacier. We had hoped for more data to come through at the end of this summer. Delays, COVID, wildlife who were wanting to munch on cables and things also slowed things down. But we've started to now monitor Mount Meager, and there's a lot of great graduate students at a whole bunch of the universities at Quest, at SFU, at UBC, all trying to get a better understanding of what's making this mountain tick.
Amazing. Thanks, Glenn. If I'd known you're going to be here, I definitely would have called on you.
Not a problem.
I would have slotted you right in there.
Not a problem.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah, Veronica, we do have a few questions. So yeah, maybe I'll start at the start. Earlier, there was a great slide of that Oxbow Lake.
Mm-hmm.
George wants to know, was that a natural occurrence, or was it a result of meanders being cut by humans in the past, if you know? I
have made the assumption that is a natural meander of the Lillooet River Valley. So right. Yeah, that's at the outdoor school.
It's amazing. It's beautiful. Okay, Valerie has one for you. So earlier you did speak about possible larger landslides on Mount Currie. As far as likelihood goes, I don't know if that's something you can rate. Very likely to less.
Well, you know, it's funny because that BCG report on Mount Currie kind of shows that the likelihood is low. And they have a couple of scenarios in that report with the run out zones. And my interpretation of that report is, though there is a risk, it's a low risk. The probability of it occurring is low. But if it did occur, there is a higher risk. And the risk does also come from the landslide coming down and then blocking up the Green River. And the risk is, they assess also the effects of a backwater flood from a slide debris. So that all of these reports, well, all of the reports I talked about are pretty much available online, but all of the Pemberton specific risk factors like the Mount Currie report, like the flood risk assessment are in the SLRD website or PVDD or Village Pemberton. They all have links to these reports. Yeah.
All right. I did have one more for you here, Veronica, if you've got the time. So Nick was wondering if you had any comments, opinions on the proposed fuel thinning activities that have been floated out for the area. I think he's heard some conflicting reports of the risks versus the benefits, and maybe if you had any insight to shed on that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Nick, because I come again from that nature lens, and I look at the fuel thinning they did recently in Blackwater and really devastated great pine mushroom picking, you know, not only for me, but a lot of the Indigenous communities do pick along that Blackwater Road, and they flattened that forest. And so I think there is opportunities to do fuel thinning, but I will get back to you with my solid opinion on that. I'm not an expert in forest fire management, but I suspect with fuel thinning that from a ecosystem perspective, it might not be doing exactly what it is intended to do, is my answer. But I'll look into it for you, Nick, and then I'll let you know.
Cool. Thank you, Veronica. We've got one from Jennifer here. So she writes, with regards to an early warning system, how many additional warning points are being looked at with the upper tributaries?
Glenn, do you want to take this one? Is there any additional sites being considered?
Yeah. So we have technology is sort of the bane of my existence, keeping these things going. But there's currently an early earthquake warning sensor near the intake, the Interjex facility. And we're hoping, we're actually in discussions with Natural Resources Canada to have a separate earthquake early warning sensor in Pemberton, Squamish, and Whistler, as well as the Lower Mainland. So that's another sort of earthquake-related, the next big ones, if you like. But from my perspective as an academic, we can never have enough sensors, but it's always the reality of the cost. And can we keep them going? So we do have to try to be strategic. But I think, like what you've shown, Veronica, is given the area, there's a lot of different things going on. So trying to find that balance, it always has to be a sort of a give and take in terms of what are the priorities. So it's tricky, but we're slowly, I think we're starting to get there.
Thanks.
All right, Veronica, I've just got one more, and I think that's probably gonna bring us to the end of our time here. Marwan asks, sorry, hold on one moment here. Yeah, Marwan is interested. What do you think the effects of logging are towards the erosion that can be so troublesome? Should companies still continue to log close to town, or how do you feel about that?
You know, that's a great question, because there certainly are effects from logging, whether it's the actual logging or the road building, that have implications for stability. And to be completely honest, I'm not familiar enough with forestry practices to say with certainty, one way or the other, what the rules are about logging roads and deactivation. But from what my observations in the field is that I think there should be more consideration to how roads are put in and what blocks are logged. So I do know that they have regulation on how and how they have to build roads, how they have to be deactivated, and you know, what the geotechnical stability of a slope is. But I think that's often, sometimes those studies are very site specific to the block rather than the overall perspective. So Marwan, I feel like with my, I would say there should be careful consideration to all logging blocks. But yeah, I've tried to be very diplomatic about my own opinions versus what is regulated. So if you can tell.
I think you handled it quite well, Veronica.
Yeah,
All right, guys, that takes us up to 8. Hold on, I'm gonna just do this. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us. Veronica, you were amazing. It was super informative. I was really happy to be a part of it. Glenn, thanks for kicking in. That was unexpected and awesome. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And like I say, this has been recorded, so it will be available to rewatch or to recommend to anyone who you think might be interested. And I think that's it, Veronica.
okay, thanks. And yeah, if you'd like to join us again for our upcoming workshop, Glenn will be speaking as well as some other true experts. And yeah, looking forward to a great community discussion.
Sounds great. And I have posted the link up. I typoed the first one, but I put the real one underneath it. So it is in the chat if anyone wants to grab it real quick. Yeah, and thank you to everybody.
Thanks, Brennan, and thanks, library.
Have a great night, guys.
Okay.
Take care.
Good night.